religious belief?
For most Americans, groups are a stronger frame of reference than ideology. Religious differences, for example, are often a source of political solidarity within a group and a source of conflict with anyone who's on the outside.
We know that during the 60s, one of the most important kinds of mobilizations that came through religious activity was the civil rights movement in the South. In addition, in the 60s, there was a great deal of advocacy for peace that came specifically through religious channels. In the modern day and age, I would suggest that the predominant agenda behind religiously based participation is conservative preferences with respect to social issues, family issues, sexual orientation, abortion, and the like.
And there are those who think that one ought not to decide one's political position, ought not to make a political choice on the basis of religious beliefs. But then what are religious believers supposed to do? Pretend that they're not religious believers? I think that one can make a very vigorous argument and very persuasive argument against any form of government establishment of religion. But this is a far cry from saying that citizens who are religious believers are acting inappropriately in bringing their fundamental religious beliefs to bear in making difficult political choices.
Another factor that comes into play is race and ethnicity.
Well, race is, the single most important divide in American politics. It has been for a long time.
If you have an ethnic identity in common, you have a class position in common, you're same income level, you live in a certain kind of neighborhood. So there are a lot of similar factors which tend to go together.
My parents struggled to raise us. Growing up in poverty, recognizing how tough it was, recognizing the need to address some of the problems that poor people have to face, made me aware of the need to have social policies that address the poor.
A bind that we've gotten into somewhat is we view the issues of importance to racial minorities as only those of welfare, education, or kind of, housing. But what we know now is that environmental issues, where in fact toxic dumps are located, are predominantly in communities of color, so that when we talk about the environment, clearly those issues are of importance. Crime. We talk about crime in ways that we focus on the perpetrator, and sometimes that gets racialized and defined as the perpetrators are essentially all minorities. The reality is that even though there may be a disproportionate share of members of racial minority groups involved in certain crimes, the victims of those crimes are other people of color. And so crime issues are things that are very important to communities of color.
I think blacks in America have really pushed into the system pretty much, although many of them still are very skeptical about it. I think where you find people who are still not fully in but are moving in very rapidly would be in the Latino population and maybe some other new immigrant groups. The Asian Americans sometimes have stayed out of politics, but over time they move in because they can see that it has an impact on their lives and people mobilize them, they get active.
The differences between men and women on issues of political concern tend not to be as great as many people think.
The problem with the way the gender gap is reported now in media is that it's reported as if it's a horse race, and it's almost always done through opinion polls. So it goes this way, it goes that way, you watch it like a ping pong game. The gender gap is not feminist, and it's not feminist in the sense that it's an ideological vote based on abortion rights. It is loosely feminist, I think, in the sense that more women have interests really comparable to men.
And political inclinations related to one group are offset by an equally strong identification with a different group.
So if you're a realtor, you have a set of interests. If you're a small businesswoman, you have a set of interests. And in fact, if you follow the current second Bush campaign, you will see that he is already mobilizing heavily among small business women owners as a constituency. And that's very smart because the polling data does show that women who own small businesses tend to vote Republican.
The clearest line of demarcation in the political arena is that which exists between the two major political parties.
A lot of ethnic and socioeconomic characteristics of people lead them to choose one party or another. But it's still the case that most people are Democrats or Republicans, and most people who call themselves Democrats vote for Democrats almost all of the time, and the same for Republicans.
There's an enormous amount of data showing that people become more stably partisan the older they get. There's also a fair amount of data that show that there's a generational difference, too, that the people who came of age during the Depression and during the New Deal became strongly partisan and stayed that way through the rest of their lives. Subsequent age cohorts have been less and less partisan, although it varies. But by and large, as people settle down, find their occupations, have families, pursue careers, they'll find where they belong politically, and then they'll pretty much stay there.